Hello. So I've just finished reading the last book in the Witcher series, The Lady of the Lake. And I feel, almost compelled to make something short about the whole series. The Lady of the Lake for me was a little bit of a slower read compared to the other books, but the ending has sort of a strange impact on me. And I want to talk about it some. First off, for most of people listening, probably only have watched the series, but you may have read the books as well. So the series, the first season, follows the two short story collections, basically to the end of them, The Last Witch and The Sword of Destiny. I've read The Last Wish, not read The Sword of Destiny. And then the second season then begins to almost immediately deviate from the first novel. So most of the second series is adjacent accurate, but not accurate to the books. And then the third season is, we don't need to talk about it. What we have here, though, in the whole arc of the Witcher saga, if you want to say, are 5 main novels, 2 sets of short stories, which again is the first season of The Witcher, and an optional sort of new entry, Season of Storms. I actually have it on my bookshelf. I haven't read it yet, but it's not integral to the ending of the story. The Lady of the Lake, which is the 5th novel, is the end. And that's my spoiler-free section. I'll now immediately go into the spoilers of the series, but I want to give warning that if you want to read them, stop listening to this now and just go read them. Come back if you'd like. To give a summary of the whole story, though, very quickly for anybody who's maybe never heard of it, never interested in listening, we have a witcher who kills scary bad things, and the scary bad things come from other worlds. It's complicated to get into, and really not totally explained actually in the books as to how the worlds intersect and you can interact with them world to world. But a bunch of different monsters, including vampires apparently, come from different worlds and got trapped here. After the conjunction of the spheres, something went wrong, and the Witcher was created to remove those things. It's unclear to me in the books whether or not humans are native to this world. I think humans are actually native to another world in which they, spoiler again, remain slaves there, basically forever, as far as the story tells us, and that's only clear in the Lady of the Lake. Yeah, so you have this Witcher who goes and kills things, does mercenary work for pay, and you have this sorceress group over here in left field that is more or less pulling the strings of most of the, what you would call an analog for most of Northern Europe, right? Southern Europe is mostly the French analog of those who worship the sun, for lack of a better term, the Nilfgaardians. They feel very French to me, feel very Southern European, and they call them the Nordlings, with no jest at all. That's the name that they use for the Northern Europeans that sort of are all these smaller kingdoms and ruled largely by kings, but really all of the strings are pulled by these sorcerers and sorceresses. And that whole order really gets splintered up in some of the later books, but for now, in the beginning of the first book, they're very unified. Bickering some, but the lodge is sort of all unified. The groups are all unified in training up sorceresses and sorcerers. It's never really explained in detail how you find somebody who has power, an inclination of magical energy or use of magic. Most of them are elves, right? Yennefer, the sorceress, who we're going to follow, has 1/8 or 1/16, I can't remember, blood of elven blood, I should say. And that's sort of the whole set piece, what happens in the end of The Last Witch, which is the first short story collection, the first anthology, is that Geralt wishes that their lives become intertwined. Basically, that he loves Yennefer and Yennefer loves him. We don't actually get the wish. We don't know exactly what it is, but that's the outcome. Their lives are intertwined forever by a djinn wish, which is crazy to me that that's the wish that he makes. But it sort of gives it a deep seed into the feelings and thoughts of this particular Witcher, but also probably Witchers in general, is that they are renowned, and they say this over and over in the books, that the stereotype of Witchers is that they don't actually feel emotions, and this is very untrue. They're very stoic. They're very almost sort of Spartan-esque in how they're trained, right? They die very often in the conversion to a Witcher. Most of them are homeless boys who have got dropped off there, have no families, have no friends or anyone to take care of them, so they get dropped off, and in the trials of the grasses that turns them into a Witcher, most of them die, and they're raised in a very stoic way. They're meant to be killers. They're raised to be killers, and that's all that their life is supposed to be. But they still have emotions. It's very clear that Geralt feels things, and he wishes that this very powerful sorceress, who has up until now been nothing but an absolute mean, I'll refrain from swearing because I haven't swore yet. Maybe they'll keep it monetized. but yeah, they don't. She's been very terrible to him in this short story. Abused him, taken over his mind, had him commit crimes in her name. Very rude things that she's done with him. Yet he wishes that they love each other for the entirety of their lives. And that sort of propels the whole story of them on again, off again relationship, and a lot of stuff that is not really relevant to the plot to get into. But they love each other. There's no way around it, and neither of them want to stop loving each other. That's sort of the crux. They get mad at each other. They hate each other sometimes, but they always want to love each other. Yennefer never tries to undo the djinn spell. Never even gives an indication that she wants that. She deeply wants to both love and be loved by this other person who's also very powerful. There's a dynamic of people choosing powerful people to be entertained or love or care about. That's sort of a sifting dynamic in relationships in these books, is that the power level you have, sort of the capability of different things is, or even like the proudness that you have of your self-independence, is how you get sorted romantically, which is very strange to me. Maybe it's true to life, but it feels very, I don't know, it feels almost very forced in a way, but maybe forced by the characters, right? And so you have this develop over 5 books. There, in my eyes, that's the main thrust of the narrative. I know Ciri is supposed to be in the main thrust of the narrative, but the Ciri happens sort of as a necessary thrust of their story, because they really need a child to wrap around and be a mother and father to. And they find that in Ciri. Geralt finds that in Ciri, and then, Yennefer really takes that on and is happy to take her as a daughter. Geralt never calls her daughter, even at the end of the series, but Yennefer calls her daughter, and Ciri calls Yennefer mother. And it's such an interesting dynamic that Geralt is never willing to call her his child. And of course, Ciri gets that stoic vibe from him and never calls him father, I don't think, in any of the series. Certainly not at the end. Maybe in the 4th book, but I don't think she does. And so it's a very interesting dynamic of stoicism versus desire to love in the whole arc of this, even to the end. And I really had no desire to even record something up until I've finished The Last Wish, or excuse me, not The Last Wish, until I finished Lady of the Lake, because Lady of the Lake had such a melancholic imprint on me. It was a little bit of a slow read. At the very end, the last 3 hours of the book went back and forth and sort of drug its feet in my eyes. There was a lot of important closing that happened, a lot of closure that went through, but it really didn't need to last as long as it did. It didn't need to have so many what I felt were almost bait and switches, but that's not what it's about for me. What it's about for me is just the melancholy of the decision the author made to remove these people from their world. Okay, and obviously big spoiler, I've already said that, but the spoiler for me is that Yennefer and Geralt, they didn't die, they weren't killed at the end, but Ciri, with the help of a unicorn, which we will get into briefly later, they took them and put them in a different world. We don't say how, we don't, and it actually doesn't make it clear if maybe they did die, but I'm convinced that they didn't die, that they just were taken to another world. And Geralt and Yennefer just are able to assumedly spend the rest of their lives together in some other place that isn't as hostile and as convoluted and so tied up in baggage as their entire world is for them. And then Ciri also does the same thing. She leaves. She leaves and goes into, again, spoilers, big spoilers here, goes to our world. And probably goes to Camelot and has, adventures with, she is the Lady of the Lake. She goes in and probably has adventures with, King Arthur and everybody else at the court in Camelot. And for me, this is such the word betrayal is not correct, because I think there's a nugget of truth in this, but there's such a hard, difficult thing for me to even agree with the ending, because it feels like he's saying, oh, all of this bigotry and racism and these experiences you had, and there's no ability to have reconciliation between people. You can't reconcile yourselves to this world. You have to leave, right? Almost like you have refugees in countries and they just have to leave or they'll be killed. And, maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe there's a real world where, and, there's a lot of places where basically everybody gets killed who doesn't leave. Everybody wants to make a big deal about, Hitler and the Nazis killing Jews, and that's a big deal. That's, it's an atrocity. And I think it's just because that it's a very European thing, but there are ethnic atrocities, all over Africa that have happened since, and I'm sure in Asia there's still some happening, and we don't need to get into that situation and make this terribly political, but just it happens, it exists in real life, and that's true. And I don't want to pretend like some people don't have the choice between leaving their country and being killed, because I think that happens some, but it sort of hurts my soul that the conclusion of the author, which he's a wonderful author. I really loved all of his books. It hurts me that he's basically saying, yeah, these people can't reconcile with the world. They don't have a choice. People want to kill them, and people want to control them, and that's their fate in this world. Their choice is to leave or be killed or manipulated. They don't have enough. They're just one person. They don't have enough to prevent the will of hundreds or thousands of people who wish them to be overpowered. That's hard for me to accept. And I think one of the things that also rubs me the wrong way about the book is I think it's a fundamentally atheistic work. And I don't know that that's even true, but it feels that way. He does a good job of accepting other religions as they are, right? He sort of gives Nenneke, which is one of the priests of the mother of, I can't remember her name, but it's a goddess that she worships, and they talk about the Nilfgaards. They worship the sun, and they make some loose approximation to Christianity there, but it's really not very close. I mean, they're worshiping the sun. If anybody knows, I should say, about the sort of contentious relationship with those who worship the sun and Judaism during the time periods where they cohabitated, that's obviously a big red flag, and no Jew or Christian would be like, oh yeah, that's my religion, we worship the sun. That's a very no type of thing to say, for obvious reasons if you know the historical background around that. So in my eyes, it's a fundamentally non-Christian atheist work that just happens to have religion in it. And some people will say, well, yeah, duh, it's not Earth. And I say, well, fair, but the writer of The Lord of the Rings is Christian and gives a fundamentally Christian work. So even though you don't have the world to be Christian, it doesn't mean that you can't have Christian values and subtle theism in there that is, giving a message across. But I'll digress from that a little bit and just say that the reason that I bring that up at all is because Christianity is about reconciliation. And some people will scoff at me saying that, but that's the core of the religion, the spirituality of Christianity. And Christ is to be reconciled both with God and with each other. And the idea that this book is saying that can't happen is disappointing to me, I think, at a fundamental level. I thought about it for a long time, It's been in my mind for several days. And that's mostly why I feel compelled to talk about it. Yeah. Just to give my thoughts on the arc of Ciri, it's very interesting to me that the conclusion of what is supposed to be the main narrative, that I don't even view as the main narrative, but what is supposed to be the conclusion of the main narrative is that Ciri has been generationally bred, like she's the outcome of generational breeding, to cause the ability to reopen what is basically the conjunction of the spheres of having these things linked together, these worlds linked together, to be able to be passed through in all directions again. She's supposed to be one more generation is all it takes to be able to create that connection between worlds. And this talk about destiny and it being unavoidable and Ouroboros eating its own tail, all of that is really, I think, the author at the end of the story saying a big FU to that whole viewpoint, that whole idea. He's basically saying, no, that's not true. People designed this destiny for her. The elves in the other world designed this destiny for her. The mages, the sorcerers and sorceresses, they designed this. They didn't design it, but they are trying to co-opt this to have their own purposes and their own uses, to create it and do as they see for it, all in the name of the greater good, right? Everybody claims that their view is the view that is best, and that view is going to save the most people and do the most good. And of course, the narrative presents them as all liars, every one of them, all self-centered, all self-seeking, none of them looking to do any good for anyone but themselves and their small group of people that they're concerned with. And so the hypocrisy of claiming the greater good in each case, for forcing Ciri to have sex or be impregnated, essentially being raped by these people to produce a child. The author does a really great job of bringing that center stage and saying, this is hypocrisy, right? This is, you are using and manipulating this person to get what you want out of the situation. And no matter what way you cut it, it's wrong. And he endorses that view, that statement, by Ciri basically leaving their worlds, all the worlds that involve elves and sorceresses, and going to our world and having fun in Camelot, right? She's never seen again in the world of The Witcher, not for hundreds of years, or maybe even longer, but hundreds of years certainly. That's literally given direct evidence in the last novel, which is The Lady of the Lake. There's somebody that happens, I think, 200 or 300 years after the events of the Witcher books, the last ones, and she's part of the whole thrust of the narrative. And there's evidence that Ciri is not coming back, and that dooms maybe millions of people to die or migrate south, to have entire cultures wiped away from the face of the earth. And you say, well, what right does Ciri have to reject that? Because the events of the coming Ice Age are true, they're real, and they will cause the entire continent to freeze over. And maybe there's no other way to it. Another continent. Maybe there's basically ships that don't know exactly where to go to run away. Maybe all humanity more or less dies or is brought back to a tribal civilization by this Ice Age. And that is, I think that was the narrative thrust that he wanted to make that people have think about. But I didn't really care about that, to be honest. I mean, it's sort of selfish people trying to manipulate Ciri for their own means, and Ciri says, F you. You're not actually looking to save all of these people who are going to die to this Ice Age, so I'm not going to humor you. They're going to die anyway, probably, so no matter what I do, there's no use in trying to save them, which is a real compelling argument, and that I think is at a fundamental level true, right? The elves in the other world that's not named, where the unicorns are, they try and they make it clear that they're going to enslave humanity. And even though they might rescue them, they'll be slaves for all of eternity, as long as the elves stay in charge, right? Just a side note on that for people who don't understand that, Ciri teleports to different worlds accidentally to escape people, and the elves essentially from another world catch her and keep her imprisoned and want her to have a child with an elf. Ironically enough, because elves live forever, they lose all interest in sexuality and sex drive. It goes to zero, basically. One of the reasons that they just don't have kids, and why half-breeds are so common, like half-elves are so common, is because the men get sort of beguiled by the women, and the women sort of get beguiled by the men on the opposite sexes. And that's really something that's interesting. I say that just to say that the elves actually convince her to let them have a kid because they're lying to her, they're manipulating her. She later finds out that they're just looking to save their elven brothers and enslave the humans. But the king of the elves can't have sex with her because he's been so disinterested. They're so detached from their basically natural selves that all sex drive is gone. They have no desire to have sex, and therefore, can't have the ability to actually have intercourse, which was always a very interesting concept to me, because it was talked about in other books, but in this one particularly, it exemplifies that. And just read that book, read all the books. I don't want to get into all of the fun details of all of the things that happen, but there's more to be said and that I'm leaving out, so read that. It's really interesting. Yeah, so it's just strange to me, the whole idea of these people having to leave because there's no way to reconcile them. That's it. That's all I wanted to say. I think everything's comprehensible. Yeah. What do you think? I don't know. I struggle with that a lot. That's the whole reason I'm making this. Goodbye.